So that's, of course, when you went back to bouncing at JD's, and you had your first encounter with a very unique character, Dr. Jerry Graham.
Yes, the legendary Dr. Jerry Graham. Went back to bouncing, and lo and behold, one night, Dr. Jerry Graham walks in, and he was a local. We all knew who he was because he had been in a lot of, not only because of his wrestling accomplishments, we knew he was a pro wrestler, but he had always been in fights and had a major problem with alcohol, always drunk, always out of it. And so we said, oh man, Jerry Graham, Dr. Jerry Graham is in the house. And so, long story short, we became friends on his very first visit into the nightclub. And I told him, hey, Dr. Jerry Graham, I just returned from Calgary. I wrestled, Stu Hart trained me, and I said, I don't have anywhere really to wrestle now. I said, I think I'd like to wrestle in a better place than Calgary, a little warmer maybe, and he laughed. He said, well, let's continue your career. And so I actually started training with Dr. Jerry Graham, and he said, well, why don't you just become another Graham brother? We'll just make you another brother. We already had Eddie Graham, Luke Graham, and Jerry Graham, and we'll just make you a fourth brother, just like that. I said, really, we can do that? I can just become a brother? I was not fully aware of all the little tricks of pro wrestling. He said, sure, we'll just make you. He said, what name do you want? I said, well, I really like the Reverend Billy Graham, so I'll just become Billy Graham. He said, that's a good name, Billy Graham. Said, okay, you're Billy Graham. You're my youngest brother, Billy Graham. And at the same time, the rock opera Jesus Christ Superstar was out, and a few months into the Billy Graham name, I was listening to Jesus Christ Superstar, the rock opera. I thought, man, that'd be a great name to put before Billy Graham. So I picked up the Superstar part of that rock opera and added that to Billy Graham. I said, this sounds pretty catchy. I think I'll go with this.
So were you actually the first wrestler to be called Superstar? Did you kind of coin that term?
Yes, and actually I was one of the first athletes to use the phrase, going back and looking at it. I had some other people do some research on this as well, to really start using the phrase superstar outside of that rock opera in mainstream terminology, and using it as a tag to other sports. And I was really looking back at it, probably one of the very first to ever call themselves a superstar, and it was only because of the rock opera. But that phrase obviously caught on, and now everybody's a superstar.
All the wrestlers are superstars.
Yeah, they're superstars now automatically. As soon as you sign your contract, you're a superstar.
You're the original, that's for sure.
Yes. Jerry Graham, Dr. Jerry Graham, said we need to wrestle somewhere other than a few Indian reservations that we wrestled on around Arizona. And he said, I've worked in LA a lot. I said, well, why don't you who's the promoter? And he said, Mike LaBelle. I said, why don't you just call him and say, you have a younger brother, can bench press 600 pounds, I can arm wrestle anybody and probably beat him, because I was so confident. And he says, it's a good idea. And I was there when he actually picked up the phone and called Mike LaBelle from Jerry Graham's apartment. And Mike LaBelle said, let me think about it. That was his answer. And I was listening to Jerry Graham talk to Mike LaBelle. And when they hung up, I said, what did he say, brother? He said, he needs to think about it. And I said, brother, he doesn't need to think about it, man. I said, I can feel it. That's a stall. I think he's stalling. I was getting pretty smart, not only to business, but very worldly smart. I said, I can smell something funny. I think that's a stall. I said, I think we need to drive over to LA and just show up with me in a tank top and walk in that office and say, here we are. Dr. Jerry Graham and his younger brother, superstar Billy Graham, and still had not bleached my hair blonde yet. He said, that is a great idea. And he says, we got to bleach your hair blonde, and we got to redo his hair. His hair wasn't blonde either. And so we brought out the bleached our hair blonde, and drove directly to Los Angeles from Phoenix, got a hotel, Santa Monica. The next morning, walked into that office, and Fred Blassie was the head booker with Charlie Moto, a Japanese fellow, and Mike LaBelle in the office, and we walked in, and their jaws dropped when they saw Dr. Jerry Graham. And Freddie Blassie hated Jerry Graham with a passion. I don't know why.
Because he had an
alcoholic and everything, and all of his problems and stuff. And they literally, jaws hit the ground, and the first words out of Mike LaBelle's mouth to us, to Jerry Graham actually, was, I thought I told you we'd think about it and we would call you. And then I said, I could feel the tension. Immediately I could feel the tension. I said, well, I just thought it would be better if we came over and you could take a look at me and this right here nobody has. I was an instant promo. I just started cutting a promo instantly, and I said, nobody can beat me in arm wrestling. And I can go on your television and accept all challengers. And I said, we will get over. I cut a promo, just an instant promo, just came out of nowhere automatically, and Mike LaBelle went, and they all, and Freddie Blassie kind of paid attention, and they said, well, that may not be a bad idea. And so they take a look at me, and I said, because they were thinking beyond Jerry Graham and really maybe superstar Billy Graham. So they actually took us, and they said, okay, we're going to give you a chance. But they warned Jerry Graham. They warned him. They said, if you screw up one time, in other words, if you get drunk and you can't perform one time, you, pointing at me, are fired. I said, well, why should I be fired? I don't even drink. Yes, what? He said, well, you're a tag team. We're going to make you a tag team. And if he goes, you go. So, in other words, I got to be a babysitter. Exact words I told Mike LaBelle. He said, that's right. You got to babysit Dr. Jerry Graham if you want this thing to work. So that's what I did. I had to babysit him. And Jerry Graham lasted about 2 weeks and abstained from drinking. And then one night decided to get some drinks, alcohol, get a six-pack on the way back into town, and got drunk. And I let him out of the hotel that we were staying at, and he proceeded to go on downtown Los Angeles to get drunker and drunker, and got arrested and thrown in jail. And so that, of course, got back to Mike LaBelle. We had a phone call the next morning, I did, to come to the office immediately. And Jerry Graham was still in jail, so they had to bail him out. And they said, you're fired. We give you 2 weeks notice right now. You're gone. I said, wait a minute. I didn't do anything. I don't drink. I don't even drink. And I said, I would like to stay. I would like to stay. I don't drink. I said, I'm not a problem. I said, and I distanced myself from Dr. Jerry Graham. And they said, well, Mike LaBelle said, well, let me think about it. But they did give Jerry Graham, and the next 2 weeks was hell on earth because he drank every night after every match and got so drunk and so far out there that I had to drag him out of these bars and nightclubs on the way back to Los Angeles, and it was hell for us, hell for me because I wasn't even a drinker. I didn't even drink, and I had to babysit him literally, and President Nixon was the president at the time, Richard Nixon, living in San Clemente, California. And on the way back from San Diego, we stopped in San Clemente so Dr. Jerry could get a couple six-packs to drink on the way back up to Los Angeles. And he just decided to go inside the bar. And I said, man, are we going to spend the night in San Clemente? We're only 70 miles from L.A. And he started drinking and drinking. We got a room, and he got so drunk. And this is the home away from the White House of President Richard Nixon. And so full of secret security, secret security people. He got so drunk and so out of control. Finally came back to my room about 2 o'clock in the morning after causing havoc at the bar, and got in the room. And the next thing, red lights everywhere, beating on the door, Secret Service. This guy, the President of the United States, lives here. This is a summer retreat. This guy is a maniac. He's drunk. He's beating people up. He's destroying things. And I said, look, man, you can tell I'm not drunk. I don't even drink. They said, yeah, but you're with him. I said, well, look, why don't we do this? Let me get him out of town. I said, instead of throwing us both in jail, because they said, you're going to jail, both of you right now. You can't do this in the home of the President of the United States of America. You can't act like this. You can't get away with this, because he was wild when he was drunk. So I said, I'll get him out of town. We'll leave right now. They said, get him in the car. We want to see it, man. I got our stuff together, threw him in the car, and drove to Los Angeles. And then, thank God, the 2 weeks was up. But a horrible thing, I'll throw this story in, because it was outside of wrestling. A horrible incident happened right here in Phoenix with Jerry Graham when his mother died, and she owned a lot of land up in North Phoenix. It was worth a lot of money, $500,000 back then in the 60s. That was probably like $1 billion today, maybe, who knows? A lot of money. She owned a lot of land. And she died in the hospital. And Jerry Graham, Dr. Jerry Graham, went into the hospital here in Phoenix. This was before I became a wrestler. This happened about a year before I met him. Went into the hospital with a pistol, with a gun, and pulled it on the doctors and said, I want my mother. I want to get my mother out of here. And they said, sir, your mother has passed away. She's dead. And he says, yeah, I know, but I still want her. He walked into the room where they had her. He said, take me to her. They did. Of course, they had a gun. Jerry Graham had a gun on the doctors. Took his mother, threw her over his shoulder. Dead, deceased mother. Carried her out to his car. Put her in the front seat of his car. And drove away with his mother. And so, of course, they called the police. You pull a gun on a doctor in the hospital, my God. And so the police just followed him and finally slowed him down and finally cornered him, and were able to talk him out of releasing his mother and getting his poor deceased mother back to the hospital, and arrested him. And then it came to realize that once the paperwork came from his mother that all the land that she owned, she didn't leave any to him. She left it to some charity, about $500,000 worth of land. And it went to a charity, and then he really, really went off the deep end and started drinking heavier. If you could drink heavier, he did. If it was possible, he did, because he didn't get any of the inheritance. But yet...
And he had been taking care of her a good amount and sending her money, hadn't he?